Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a multifaceted individual from Singapore,
Michael Switow.
Michael, welcome to the show. Michael is the founder of Switow Media. He's a writer, editor, producer, moderator, and MC, a media coach, and an anti-poverty campaigner. He's a seasoned media professional and author, and we're going to speak about his new book. He's a civil society leader, launched the One Singapore campaign, which is part of the movement to make poverty history, as well as the One Emergency Fund, which provides critical stopgap assistance to families in need. And Michael is launching a book coaching service. So, Michael, tell me a little bit about Switow Media and Wow Asia.
Ashutosh, well, that's an incredible introduction. Thank you so much. And let me just say, it's really an honor and a privilege to be on The Brand Called You. Thank you for inviting me on. Let me start by talking about Switow Media. We are all about creating engaging content, content that speaks to people, whether it be on the written page, in a podcast, or a live event. And let me give you two examples of how we do that. The first is with panel discussions, be it at a live event or online. I mean, tell me, how many times have you gone to a panel or watched one and just thought, what are these people talking about? Or I'm going to fall asleep, right? And the reason is the content hasn't really been thought through, and there's not a moderator who can bring the discussion together in the right way. So what we do is we help strategize to sharpen the topic, to determine what would be the best talking areas and questions in advance without giving too much away, because you want to keep that element of spontaneity. And then also throwing in some factoids and anecdotes that people remember and can bring home with them. So that's one area. The other that you mentioned is a relatively new service. It's called book coaching. And I got to say, you're phenomenal. I hear you're working on your 9th book right now. So I think everyone has at least one book inside of it. And often it's really difficult to pull that out. I don't know what you found or not. But what we do is we strategize with people to determine what that content is, to sharpen it and shape it, come up with an outline or a table of contents, and then conduct a series of interviews around those topics to bring out the information. So essentially, it's coaching you to write your own book, leading you along the way. And then we can also help with editing, publishing, marketing, whatever it takes to get your book out there.
Amazing, amazing. So I'm going to come back to your book coaching service, but let's talk about your books. Your first book, which was Taming the Mouse, How a Small Hong Kong Company Came to Dominate Disney. Tell me a little bit about the book, the hypothesis, and what made you write it.
Okay, so let me show you the book here first. This is Taming the Mouse. Here we go. And it's a story of how any company, any small company, can slay giants. It's set against the backdrop of a small marine park, a small amusement park in Hong Kong that was facing its imminent demise. Beautiful place, Ocean Park, Hong Kong.
I've been there.
Everyone thought it was, it's fantastic, right? The mountains, the water, the aquarium. Beautiful topography, but everyone thought it was going to go bust because Disney was coming to town. But it didn't. You know what happened? They brought in someone new, a great guy named Tom Merman, and together with the chairman, Alan Zeman, they transformed the park. And every year for a decade, they kicked Disney's butt in terms of attendance numbers, revenue, profitability, community engagement, you name it. So what we do in the book is we pull out lessons that they use to make that happen and that any company can use.
Amazing, amazing. You know, I remember that, the Ocean Park very distinctly. My wife and I had just moved to Singapore, and I remember that roller coaster on the edge of the mountain, and it was a frightening experience because of the sheer drop that was there next to it.
It is, and that roller coaster is still there. It's not a very big one, but you're riding on the edge of a cliff, and it's old.
Yes.
It's safe, perfectly safe. But because it's old, it gives you this impression when you look down of, oh my God. So you're absolutely on target.
It took me quite a while to gain courage to be able to get back onto a roller coaster after that. But Michael, coming back to your book, you said there are certain interesting, if I can use the word, tips for people to, that in a David and Goliath kind of a battle. Would you like to share some of your thoughts from your book?
Sure, I'd be happy to share some. And let me say, I mean, we pulled out 10 lessons, and some of them build on the shoulders of others, people like Stephen Covey, and some of them are original.
Right.
One that I like is control the controllable. So there are things that happen that are beyond our control. So let's say you're a company and the exchange rate where you live depreciates or appreciates. It moves in a direction that makes your products more expensive to a certain audience, right? Or let's say that the international border closes, so people can't come over. You can't control that. But what you can control is how you react to it. So instead of targeting that international audience, you can target a domestic one. And what we find is if you break a problem down into smaller and smaller parts, there actually isn't anything that you can't control. And I think this is great advice, both for businesses and in our own lives. So that's just one example for you. There are a number of other leadership tips in there. You know, I encourage you to check them out.
Yep. And you said that this book is been recently published, or when did you publish it?
It came out pre-pandemic, so I guess it's about 3 years ago now. Ocean Park, Hong Kong has gone through some tremendous changes since Tom left. He went on to lead $1 billion project in China to open Universal Studios Beijing. But I'll say part of the plan that he put in place is still bearing fruit. They just opened a brand new water park resort called Waterworld on the backside of the mountain, which was actually a decade in the making. It's absolutely phenomenal water park when you look at it.
Incredible. So I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to check out Michael Switow's book, and I'll read it out again. It's Taming the Mouse, How a Small Hong Kong Company Came to Dominate Disney. And Michael, you can show us your book as well. Thank you.
Can I just give a shout out to a friend of mine, a guy that I grew up with. His name is Eric Jones. He's a creative guy, lives in Paris, and he did the cover work for this. I've known him since we were in primary school, and it was just an honor to be able to work with him and share his ideas. I hope you can see it there.
Yep, we can see it.
So to see Mickey Mouse without actually seeing.
Very nice, very nice. And I love the play on the word mouse in your book. But moving on, you know, you also have a new book coming up. I'm not sure if you're at liberty to speak about it.
I'm really excited about this, Ashutosh. I mean, because this has been a labor of love, sometimes like pulling teeth, and it should be published this year. It's a book that looks at how to transform communications in a company in a hyper-competitive world.
Wow.
And it's something that we really believe can completely transform corporate organization. I'm working with a guy named Bill Cornwell. He's an executive coach who's worked with people across Fortune 500 companies. And he worked on this model for over 12 years before coming to me and saying, hey, can you help me bring this book to life? And I'll tell you one thing that we find when you look at business literature, almost all of it, if you look in Amazon or you go to a bookstore, it all focuses on leaders, how to be a better leader, people who are aspiring to be a leader. But leaders constitute only a small part of the people in a company. The so-called followers are neglected. And yet you need everybody on board, and moving in the same direction if you're going to succeed. And so those are some of the issues that we address.
Amazing, amazing. So let me ask you a few questions on now your book coaching service. You did tell me about the amazing support you give to budding writers. But my first question to you is, what makes one a good writer, even if one has, and everyone has a book inside them? I agree with you.
All right, well, I think what makes a good writer, frankly, it's time and practice. So you've heard of the 10,000 hour rule, right? Anything you spend a lot of time on, you will and can get better at. And to be perfectly honest, I've met some very smart people who are not good writers, right? And we're not just talking about grammar, just they don't convey their thoughts in a way which is clear or which is engaging and keeps people wanting to turn that page. So if I had to say, what makes a good writer, there's a few things I'll share real quick. One is an old rule, which I don't know if you ever learned this in school. It's show, don't tell.
Correct.
right? So you want to describe things so that people can sense it. You don't just want to bang them over the head with it.
Mm.
Second, I think accuracy is key. Accuracy is very important. You want to have your facts straight. You need to be able to craft things with details. So that would be the third aspect. And then also, so you have the details, you have accuracy, and essentially you just want to share things in a way that people can relate to.
Fascinating. And a follow-up question to what makes a good writer, Michael, is what makes a good story?
That one I think is a tough one. As I said, I believe we all have a story inside us, and it's a matter of pulling that out. And you know, if I look at the experience that I've had writing on a range of topics, you know, some of which on the surface don't seem that interesting. If you're talking about financial markets, which I've done quite a bit, it's not of interest to everyone. But if you tell that story in a way which is clear, which is engaging, and I keep using that word, meaning that it appeals to people, it's fascinating, it's motivating, so it educates and maybe even entertains, then that, in my view, is what makes a good story.
Incredible. So my next question to you, Michael, is, you know, when you write, is there a particular discipline that you follow while writing? I mean, every day, the 2 hours, wake up at this time, or is it when you have the motivation to write?
I write all day.
Okay.
I mean, basically from morning to night, I get up, I take stretch breaks. Sometimes I turn and I do some other work, but I am basically at it all day. And I've heard of the writers who say, oh, they wake up early, they spend 4 hours and that's it. That one doesn't work for me. It really is just something that I am continually doing, revisiting what I've written to sharpen it, to edit it, talking with people, conducting those interviews, looking over the notes. So either you're writing or you're thinking about writing or you're doing the work to prepare to write.
Amazing. And have you ever faced writer's block?
Oh my God, who hasn't? Have you?
Oh, all the time.
It's, you know, it's frustrating. One tip that I got for that can help, and I'll just share it to budding writers, is sometimes it helps to close down for the day, mid-sentence or mid-paragraph, so that you actually know where you're going to pick up again. And so you can start right with that thought and keep going. But I found if you don't really know what's going to go on that page, then sometimes you just have to take that step back and think about it again. What is the point that I want to convey, and how am I going to do that?
Fascinating. So now let's move to another segment of our conversation, which is your work as a civil society leader. Tell me about the work you are doing. What was your motivation to start One Singapore? And then we'll talk about the One Emergency Fund.
So I think there's been a couple threads through my life. One is creativity and media. And I didn't mention public policy. I have a background in international and public affairs. Okay. So bringing that to bear. The other is contribution. And I believe I learned this from my parents. I think they set an example for me at a young age that it's important to give back to the community. And so whether it was volunteering in homeless shelters, or I worked in the US Peace Corps for a few years in West Africa, always wanting to give back, but also maybe learn as I do it. So coming to fast forward, right, to 2005, I realized that I'd been living in Singapore for 5 years at that point, and it was time to make a greater contribution to the community, because I wasn't doing that. I was like, wow, those 5 years have flown by, and now this is more than 15 years ago. And so I ended up setting up with somebody else, One Singapore, which is part of the movement to make poverty history. So it has two sides to its mission. Our mission is to raise public awareness and take concrete actions to make poverty history. Because if you don't know about a problem, you can't do anything about it. Correct. But once you learn about it, you want to take action. So everything we do, we try to bring those two areas together.
And when you say you want to make poverty history, there are two different ways to do it. I mean, you know, one is to give someone money or food, and the other one is, as you say, teach a man how to fish and he won't ever remain hungry. What is the work that you do to be able to actually make poverty history?
So I think change takes place on a couple of levels. So let me share this idea with you, and then I'll give you the example of the One Emergency Fund. So at any charity, no matter how big, name it, Save the Children, Oxfam, haven't eliminated more than 1% of global poverty on their own.
Correct.
And they know this because change needs to take place at a macro level. And that's why they engage in advocacy. So advocating for the right policies at the international level with, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations, or the right policies at the national and local levels, because those policies can impact the lives of millions upon millions of people.
Correct.
But at a local level, at a micro level, each and every one of us can make an impact in our communities, impacts that change lives. And I'd say that's where the One Emergency Fund comes into play.
Okay.
So it provides financial and in-kind assistance to families here in Singapore, individuals and families in need. And it's meant as stopgap assistance, because what we found is that when someone goes to apply for government assistance or to a larger charity, it might take 4 to 6 weeks for that to be processed. Okay, but what are they going to do in the meantime? Or maybe their income is just above a certain threshold and they don't qualify for that other assistance, or they're getting assistance, but it won't pay for something like a pair of new specs for their child who can't see at school. So we created the One Emergency Fund to address this. Most of the assistance is relatively small. It's not recurring, but it makes a big difference in people's lives.
Interesting. And do you crowdsource your funding, or do you have large backers who give you money for the fund?
We're a bootstrap operation. I wish we weren't, but let me just give you an example. A little over a year ago, we were getting maybe 30 applications a month, and now it's in the neighborhood of 150.
Okay.
Right? Just because the demand has surged so much. And not only that, not only has the number increased, but we find that really some of the situations that are being described seem to be more dire as well. So we do take public donations, and the best way to do that is there's a site in Singapore called giving.sg. So you just go there and look for One Singapore, and you can donate to the One Emergency Fund, or go to our own website, www.onesingapore.org. But we wouldn't be able to do this, frankly, with small donations alone. They make a big difference, but they also help us to get the bigger donations. And we've now had 3 grants from Temasek Trust, which is a big foundation, a major foundation here in Singapore. And it's thanks to their support and some corporate support that we're able to continue doing this. But I just got to say, every support comes with some conditions, and we have to show matching funds from the public before sometimes those donors will release funds to us. So I encourage everyone listening, please lend a hand.
Wonderful. So one more question for you, Michael, and that is that how has the pandemic impacted a lot of the challenges you see in One Singapore and One Emergency Fund?
Well, the need for the fund certainly increased a lot in the pandemic. We saw people's wages being cut, jobs being lost. In today's age, you never know when you might have to stay home because your child has COVID or someone at their school has COVID. Wages are lost. Some people are working in the gig economy, and if they don't go to work, they don't make any money, right? And without money, what do you do? So, I mean, we do get applications from families who are down, to their last Maggie meal. The homeless shelters have filled up here in Singapore. We do have homeless in Singapore. You may not know it, but we do. But the shelters filled up because of the demand. And so instead of helping people stay there, which does cost some money sometimes, we've had to actually pay for hostels and other lodging. So the nature of the demand, I would say, has increased, and some of the cases are worse. And we do what we can to help people in these situations.
Amazing. So I'm now going to move to the last segment of my conversation. My viewers and listeners love to get to know my guest a little better. So I've got a couple of questions for you that I call personal questions. in such an incredible life. You worked in multiple countries, you worked in multiple areas, you're a writer, editor, producer, and so many other things. And of course, you're giving back in your role as a civil society leader. What would you say, Michael, are 3 key milestones or pivot points in your life or your career?
So one, I'm going to go back a few years. I mentioned earlier I was in the Peace Corps, and I served in Niger and in Gabon, in West and Central Africa. And I was in my 20s, and I was thinking about what to do next and to go to grad school. And I didn't know what I would go study. And my uncle, my mom's brother, BJ, he sent me some information about a program, a school in public policy. And I got to say, I had never even known, I probably didn't know what public policy was at that point. And I certainly didn't know that you could go to school and study it. And when I looked at the information on it, and I saw that people went on to use that, they went into help with charities, to journalism, business, all sorts of things. I thought this is really a great tool set. And so I applied. It was called the Woodrow Wilson School at the time. Now it's the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. And if my uncle hadn't told me about it, I wouldn't have gone. And fortunately, I was accepted, and it's given me a toolbox that I use to analyze all sorts of issues, even to this day.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's one. The second one I'll say is when I was in that program, we had to do an internship. And I was still trying to figure out exactly what I was going to do afterwards. And I knew media was one area, but I hadn't really worked in it yet. And somebody gave me some advice and said, get a fig leaf, do some writing and send it and apply. And I was fortunate in that Princeton had a lot of resources and said, if you get an internship somewhere and they can't pay you, don't worry about it. We'll give you a stipend. We'll pay for you to get there. So I sent a fax, just to give you an idea of the timing. I sent a fax off to the bureau chief of Associated Press in Manila, in the Philippines. And I got one back, and he said, we have no budget, but your comment about not needing remuneration is intriguing. Let's talk about this.
Okay.
And so I went there, and it was my first foray into Asia. And I got to work with a gentleman who smoked more cigarettes, drank more coffee than anyone I'd ever met.
Okay.
Incredibly jaded journalist, but he had earned it. And he knew more about the Philippines, and he was an American, and all his staff said this, than anybody else in the office. And so I got to kind of learn at his feet. They threw me right into the hot water, told me to start writing feature stories. And that was my introduction to Asia. And well, you might say I've been here since. Amazing. Sorry, and let me give the third one real quick. So third one I'll share is that we got some corporate support at One Singapore from a company to start up something called the One Livelihoods Fund. And this is a fund, I told you about the emergency fund. So the Livelihoods Fund helps people in the delivery trade, so who are gig workers. It helps people who want education and training, but can't afford it, or they can't get help elsewhere for it. And with that grant, we're able to give them an opportunity to earn a better livelihood. And that happened just a little over a year ago. Sorry, not even a year ago. And just really happy that we could launch this Livelihoods Fund. And we're always looking for more support for it.
Amazing. Michael, on that note, thank you very much for speaking to me. Thank you for speaking to me about Switow Media, about your book, Taming the Mouse, How a Small Hong Kong Company Came to Dominate Disney. Thank you for sharing some insights from your book with my viewers and listeners. Thank you for talking to me about what goes into becoming a good writer and to writing a good story. And thank you for talking about both One Singapore and the One Emergency Fund. Thank you again and good luck.
Ashutosh, thank you so much. I got to say, hats off to you. You have reinvented yourself. It looks many times. Your podcast, your books, it's all very impressive. Thank you for taking the time to speak.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called you.